Hi, and welcome back to the WHY-O-MYO podcast. This is Janine Steen, your host, hoping to answer your questions about the who, what, where, when, why, and how when it comes to myofunctional therapy. Is attendance important in terms of myofunctional therapy? Is it okay if you attend therapy 1 week and miss 2 weeks and come back another week and maybe come once one time, once 1 week and twice the next, and then miss 2 weeks? Attendance is crucial. When you're in your myofunctional therapy sessions or even a speech therapy session, the goal of the session is to assess the progress that has been made from the session prior and with the exercises that have already been introduced. But it's also designed to make sure that the patient is progressing, but also so that we can now either discontinue a goal, introduce a new goal, or introduce a higher level skill to that goal. So if a patient is only attending therapy inconsistently and not coming the minimum of twice a week, then if a patient is even practicing the entire time they're not in therapy, even though they're not in session, they're still doing their home practice, but they could be doing their home practice wrong. So instead of us being able to introduce a new goal on a Tuesday and reassess it on Thursday and Friday, and then make changes to that goal or correct any issues that we identify or difficulties that that patient has, or identify anything that they may be doing wrong, well, now if they do not come in on that Thursday or Friday, and they don't come in until the following Friday, so now perhaps 10 days later, they just spent 3 times a day for 10 days practicing something incorrectly. And if you had listened to my last podcast, I spoke about how we are changing a motor plan. So the more we do the same motor plan over and over again, our brain now rewires, and now this becomes part of our new motor plan. But just like with a tongue thrust, if you are a tongue thruster for 9 years of your life, that is the way your brain has been wired, and that is the way you utilize your tongue or your thrusting for it, whether it be swallowing, speech, or both. So the same type thing happens during the remediation process. If we are taking our sessions to introduce new goals and reevaluate old goals, and we send those home to practice at home, and you practice 10 days the wrong way 3 times a day, well, what is the motor plan that our brain is now learning? And think about how many motor plans our brain can function and utilize. If it takes us a year or more to break a tongue thrust habit, what can happen during 10 days of practicing incorrectly? So it will ultimately limit or take away from the progress. And at that point, during those 10 days, yes, maybe some exercises were still being done correctly, and there are gains maybe being made with regards to lip strength or tongue posture. But if you spent 10 days practicing 3 times a day for now 30 times, and you're doing it incorrectly, well, not only the brain is going to be all sorts of confused, of course, but we're trying to break the old motor plan, teach a new motor plan, and then if that motor plan is not being done correctly, well, now the next time you come into therapy and the therapist, myofunctional therapist, assesses and determines and corrects what you've been doing wrong, well, essentially you've lost 10 days of your program. I will say that people definitely get frustrated with myofunctional therapy because it does take a long time and it is very tedious and monotonous. However, just like anything else we're learning to do for the first time, whether it be crawling or walking or riding a bike or playing tennis, it takes time to perfect that. And those activities I just mentioned are activities we do maybe once in a while. It's not something like swallowing where it's happening 1 to 2 times per minute, both when you're asleep and while you're awake. So that motor plan, to break the motor plan of thrusting and to change the motor plan into a correct swallow pattern, it takes time and practice and repetitive motions and repetitive exercises. And not just the repetitive exercise, but the repetitive exercise being done correctly. Now, when a patient is receiving myofunctional therapy, it is always beneficial to have therapy not 2 days in a row, but at least 1 day in between, preferably 2 or more, because I want our patients to have the time to practice the exercises that are being introduced, work on that motor plan for a period of time, so that by the time they come in for therapy the next session, hopefully that motor plan, or that exercises motor plan, is mastered, and now I can either increase it, reduce it, or alter it. Now, once a patient starts myofunctional therapy, it's not, let's start in month 1 or day 1, and in a year from now, we'll assess and see if the tongue thrust is remediated. During the course of the therapy, we reevaluate our patients on a regular basis in order to, I should say, as soon as each level of the program reaches the point where it should be mastered. So the myofunctional therapy program is a hierarchy, and it's a hierarchy of exercises, just as it is a hierarchy of skills. So once a patient completes the therapy regimen of exercises to address the first step of that hierarchy, well, now we will bring them in and reevaluate them. That reevaluation includes so much of what we introduced or what we did during their very first evaluation. Obviously, we do not need to do all of the history, etc., unless there are any updates, but we are assessing their lingual posture, resting posture, their labial resting posture, their lip strength and resistance, their ability to swallow on command without thrusting, their ability to execute movements on command, their ability to dissociate their tongue from the other oral structures. Each evaluation or reevaluation is built upon the one before. So when you come in for your first reevaluation, obviously we're assessing less skills than we are when they come in for their third reevaluation. But at their third reevaluation, we are still reassessing the skills that were mastered and what we felt to be mastered at the first reeval as well as the second reeval. And that continues. During each reevaluation, the myofunctional therapist will, the evaluating myofunctional therapist will set up and design the goals and program moving forward that must be addressed and mastered prior to their next reevaluation. And each step of the MYO program is done that way so that we do not see, we don't start day one and not see a patient for 12 months, but also so that we don't assess one thing in our first reeval and never look at it again. So by the third reeval, we have no idea if they had still mastery of that motor plan. Now, again, as much as we try to assess during our reevaluations conscious and subconscious swallows, of course, if the patient is aware of their swallow and aware and understands what we are looking for, yes, it becomes, it definitely could show that something is, they're doing better than they actually are subconsciously. However, we do as much as we can to identify their subconscious abilities, whether it be at the end of the session or at the beginning of a session or the end of an evaluation, I should say, or a beginning of a reevaluation, whether it be through conversational skills or while we are speaking with a parent or caregiver, we're actually still assessing the patient's skills so that, again, they are caught off guard. Sometimes we even take that opportunity to play a game or do something that will actually make the patient more relaxed and perhaps take down their therapy walls, quote unquote, so that it seems more of a casual atmosphere. But in that same breath, we are still assessing the patient's skills so that we can see a reflection of what's happening both consciously and subconsciously. As the evaluations progress throughout the MYO program, that we are also adding more and more demands. We're looking at their ability to chew and swallow, again, that bolus consistency, their ability to lateralize, has their range of motion improved. And then we're looking to see how they're able to manage certain textures and consistencies. We have them bring foods in from home of varied textures and consistencies, foods they eat on a regular basis, or maybe foods that are now new to their repertoire, secondary to myofunctional therapy, or the progress they've made in myofunctional therapy. We also will have them chart their what their resting posture of their tongue looks like throughout a given day, throughout a given week. We have them, we have someone assess or watch when a patient is sleeping and report back to us certain details and characteristics that help us to identify if that swallow has transitioned to a subconscious level. Even in that subconscious state, we want to make sure and identify, are they sleeping with their lips closed and breathing through their nose? We want the parent to report back to us when the child is sitting watching TV or playing a video game or doing their homework or sitting in the car. Do they notice their lips are closed? Do they notice that when they're speaking, they have better management of their saliva? Their speech sounds clearer. When they're eating at the dinner table, are they chewing with their mouth closed? Do you see that they're relying on less liquids and are filling up more on the food than they are on liquids because they're drinking to help wash down whatever they're eating as part of their compensatory strategies secondary to their tongue thrust? So there is so much that is being done subjectively. However, we are also assessing them objectively during our evaluations. We actually use a specific type of dye, a black light, so that we can determine what is happening in their mouth when they're swallowing, just as a matter of sitting at rest, or are they able to reach certain structures? Are they hitting the correct spots? And are they pushing against their teeth? Once those lips are closed and they're swallowing with their lips closed, it is very difficult for us to tell if just by the naked eye if they are thrusting. So we do rely on this specific dye and light in order to tell us what is happening in their mouth when their lips are closed and we get to that point, as well as those subjective measures so that we can determine that the patient has improved, or that motor plan has generalized now to a subconscious level. I hope I was able to give you some insight and answer some of your questions regarding myofunctional therapy. Please stay tuned and listen to our Myo Minute, and tune in to our Talk the Talk interviews with the many different medical, dental, and rehab professionals as they elaborate or answer your questions and address your concerns directly, especially when it's related to speech-language pathology and myofunctional therapy.